believe.
Welcome to Cross Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity across platforms and many other things, apparently. I am Augusto Pinaud.
And I'm Art Gelwicks. Yes, we are trained professionals discussing Guardians of the Galaxy in the pre-show, then hitting record. So that's, you know what?
Sorry, I
That's
thought
fine.
your
That's
line
fine.
was over.
Not worried about it. Not worried about it at all.
So
So,
well.
okay. So this week, this topic that I wanted to dig into actually kind of came about on its own. I was looking for a document in my file system, and I was looking and I was looking, and it took me a long time to find the document. Long time being a relative time period. It took me about 10 minutes to locate the document. And I realized that this is a problem that a lot of people encounter, and I wanted to kick this around with you, Augusto. How do you organize your files?
So so my organization is pretty simple. Let me start there. I try to the best of my abilities to digitize everything. Okay. And that is not necessarily easy, but that's my goal. Whatever is not digitized, it is on simple and alphabetical order. I took that the first time I read the Getting Things Done book by David Allen, and I never leave it behind.
Mm-hmm.
And even I group. So, for example, my daughter's all her files that I need to start in paper and digital start with her name and what it is. And that made it for really easy to find things. I have a folder with ebooks, okay, and they are organized alphabetically: last name, first name, title. And it takes time to maintain. Okay, whoever tells you no, it's a piece of cake, no, no, it's not. It takes time to maintain. But what I have learned is that when I need to find that file, okay, it is a piece of cake. So when I need to go, here in the United States, we're going to be doing taxes soon. Okay, I have just need to go to the T, okay, and there is taxes, and I can find them.
Mm-hmm.
All the taxes are in there. And what I tend to do is I create, so this year when the first paper for tax arrived, I create next year tax folder. And so it is already there. And that makes my life easier. It's fast. And if I have digital and paper, and some stuff I have digital and paper, I try to the best of my abilities that the folder name is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so that said, that's what I do with paper. My digital files tend to live in Dropbox, and I have a bazillion of folders on Dropbox, and I that's the master. That's where everything is, and I try not to have some folders here, some folders there, and some folders in other places because then they get lost. And uh, the other thing I do for organization on my files is when I share files with people,
Mm-hmm.
the folders are called Augusto slash or dash art.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And inside of that, we can create whatever you want. But on the outside, it is. Why? Because if you technically say, I send you the file, I know that I just need to find where is the Augusto art file. And inside of that will be. So it took time to create the system. It takes time to make sure, so the lazy of me done, oh, well, it's fine if I put it there. No, 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 no. Let's be disciplined and do it. But that discipline has payover many, many times.
Yeah, file management is one of those things that I've always struggled with, not from the standpoint of that it's difficult. My problem
It's
is
the
I've got,
discipline.
well, it is discipline. Mine's the number of different places I could conceivably put a file. So,
Mhm.
for example, it could be on my local hard drive, it could be on an external hard drive, it could be on Google Drive, it could be on OneDrive, it could be OneDrive Business, OneDrive Professional.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of places things that could be put. So managing that is one of the challenges. But when I look at it compared to what I would say is the common knowledge that comes out of a business environment, if you look at many business level storage systems, there's this argument that happens that folders are bad and you should only use metadata. So you could have this massive pile of files, and if you have the correct applications of metadata, then you don't have to worry about folder hierarchies. And there is some rationale to that. I mean, if you have deep folder hierarchies, you have to click through a whole bunch of things to actually find the stuff. That said, though, Google Drive doesn't support metadata, at least editable metadata. OneDrive doesn't support editable metadata in the same manner. Your local hard drive doesn't support editable metadata in the same manner. So you're using file folders every place except for maybe potentially in a business environment. So then it becomes this difficulty of, well, this is the best way to do it. Yeah, but we can't actually do that.
Yeah.
So
I try to the best of my abilities not to go deep into folders. So I try not to have more than 2 layers. So fine, you are Art Augusto, and inside of that should be cross-platform, and that's it. If we need two, don't create them inside of that. Create cross-platform dash covers, cross-platform dash notes, cross-platform dash whatever, because the problem is exactly what you said. You start creating under and under and under. I try to match that with a paper system. Okay, you will not put a folder inside of a folder inside of a folder. So you will create a second folder. And that's what I try to do on my digital. I get it. If you look at my files, my digital file system, okay, you may find a bazillion of Augusto's folder. That's fine. Okay. But I know if I'm looking for something, I know it's among the Augustos, or it's among the productivity voice, okay, or it's among whatever cross-platform. And I may have 20 folders that start with the word cross-platform. But because the next thing is so clear, I'm not afraid of, okay, it's on cross-platform. If I'm looking for the cover for this, okay, I know it is cross-platform covers and it will be there. So I don't need to think, okay, we'll be on cross platforms and inside of what folder where and inside of what folder where. I try to keep that as flat as possible.
Yeah, I try to follow the rule of what I call the file cabinet rule, which is if you imagine the drawers in a file cabinet, well, you have a file cabinet. You have the drawers, you put hanging folders in those drawers, and then you put manila folders in those hanging ones. So the maximum depth I have at any point is 4 levels. That's it. No more. Because then I need new cabinets and then it's a new top level. 4 levels is still fairly deep. It gives me a pretty deep organizational structure. But it still is not so deep that I wind up so nested that I can't hunt anything down.
Right.
That said, though, a lot of times I do need to fall back on search to locate things of common topics across, because for most file systems, it's one of those challenges where you can only have one copy of a thing. So where did you put that one copy? Now, that said, one of the things that is nice is Google Drive, for example, allows you to create shortcuts to files. So, for example, if I'm a particular folder, you were talking about the taxes. Maybe I want to have a folder for my 2021 taxes, but I also want to have a folder somewhere where I keep all my W-2s together. Okay, I only want one copy of the W-2, don't need multiple copies of it. So in something like Google Drive, I can have a folder for all the W-2s, the original copies, and then in the taxes folder, I can create shortcuts to the original W-2s. It minimizes the amount of duplication, but it still falls within the structure of organization. So I found that's a useful thing, but you're right. That really goes back to the maintenance piece too, because that you have to remember, if you delete the parent item, all those shortcuts don't work then. They have no place to go. So the second question I have with you for you then when you start to think about storage and organizing your files is, what do you think about applications that allow you to store files in them? So, for example, something like an Evernote or a OneNote or a Notion or something like that, that actually allows you to load files directly into that tool rather than keeping everything in a file system like your hard drive or Google
Right.
Drive or OneDrive. What do you think about that?
I don't know. I again, I'm boring, and I'm boring on this sense, on the sense that when something works really well,
Mm-hmm.
I prefer not to fix it. Okay, because
Yeah.
sorry, my life has so many other things that can be fixed. Why fix what is working? And as I'm listening to that, do I think, how will I implement something like that, or will I want to implement something like that? And somehow I get more stuck in the I don't know. I don't. So how you will do that?
I have a bit of a dilemma with this because there are
Hmm.
times that I found that it's useful to have a file actually in the tool. And I'll use OneNote and Notion, for example. If you're creating, let's say, a user handbook in OneNote, and you're building out a OneNote notebook with that, sometimes there are supplementary assets that you want to have available through that
Right.
OneNote notebook. Well, you can then embed that file into the notebook, and then all
Hmm.
I have to do is open the notebook, and there's the file. Convenient, yes. If the notebook breaks, if the file gets corrupted, then you lose that original file, or you lose that file that was put in. It's not like it's a linked structure. It's actually stored in that file system. If
Yeah.
you look at tools like
See,
Notion, for example,
Dropbox do that beautifully because
well,
it will allow me to do that link.
and this is where we get into that discussion, because you take something like Notion. Notion provides you both options. You can put the file into Notion, or you can put a link to the file into Notion, or you can even go an extra step. You can actually embed the file, keeping it in its original location, but making it much more accessible inside the structure.
Hmm.
So it's one of those things where you could balance the mechanism out depending on your commitment to how I'm going to store this stuff. Personally, I think it's better to rely on a file system than a productivity tool to do your file management.
Yeah.
If you're working on, let's say, a document, a presentation, asset files, who knows what, store them in a file system, link to them, connect to them from whatever your productivity tool is and your management tool is, but keep the originals in that file system for a number of reasons. For example, exactly what you were talking about earlier, the ability to share those files.
Right.
I mean, I need master copies of image assets, for example. Well, I may use that image asset 12 different times. Doesn't mean I want 12 copies of that in my productivity tool as I work them through their cycles. And you can
Right.
see good examples of that if you do, for example, website building. A lot of website editors give you that option if you're using that low code style of website editing, to go into a central image library and say, I want to use this image again. I want to use this image again. So you're not uploading multiple copies of it and burning up your file storage. Because even today, file storage still has a cost tied to it.
Yeah.
And you do have to maintain it. So the third part of this is probably the hardest part. How do you deal with digital clutter in your file system?
I don't
And
have clutter in my files.
yeah, right. Nice try. I'll give you props. You said that with a straight face, so I'll give you props for that part. Okay, so what do you do with the stuff you don't want in your file system anymore?
Oh, that's what you mean. That's clutter. Oh, that's
Well,
a
it could
problem.
be.
That's what happened when English is your second language.
Do you delete stuff, or you just keep it and
I
stick
do.
it someplace else? Okay.
I do. There are two things. I don't delete a lot.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to say is I don't know. It's storage is cheap. still is cheap, and it's easy to find. Um, that said, there's stuff that I look and I should get rid of this, and then they move into a folder called to be deleted and the date. So I give them 3 months. Okay, and then I do every quarter, every 3 months, I go into the file system and make sure that they are not dead things, and they are not folders that makes no sense or folders that are repeated. So and try to organize a little bit of that and give them a little cleanup. And when that happened, I basically put them on a folder to be deleted on 3 months from now. And then when I go and do that process again in 3 months, if there is still there, I assess and sometimes wipe out.
Yeah, I do kind of a 2-layer trash can approach. I still have that little bit of internal anxiety of, I don't know if I want to throw this out or not. So what I do is I will create archive folders. I'll create a folder literally just called archive. And if I'm not sure I want to get rid of it or not, I just throw it in there. Because at some point in time, I will circle back to that archive folder and look and see, this stuff's been sitting here forever. I don't need it. The key thing is what I'm trying to trim down is not so much the number of files that I'm keeping, but I'm trying to trim down the number of files that I'm seeing when I'm working within folders. So if I look at
Okay.
a financial folder and I have financial stuff going back to 2008, I don't need to see that every time I go into that financial folder, but I might need it at some point. So by moving it out of my main line of vision, it's
Right.
like using a banker box. You take those
It's a
manila
banker
folders
box.
out of your
Yeah.
drawer, you stick them in there, you close it up, and you put it away. If you ever need it, you can get to it really quickly, but it's out of the main line of fire. It's
Yeah.
also
And with
one.
the financials, I do an archive version and then put
Mhm.
them in there. So tax, as I mentioned, I on the digital version of that, I have tax that the year, and then I have tax that archive, or
Yeah.
and I put them in there. Don't delete them, but they are. It's a banker box. Yeah,
Yeah,
a
and
glorified banker box.
I've moved to a process now of really keeping only documents that I actively need in the cloud. Uh, the cloud is not an archive. Doesn't need to be an archive. Anything that winds up in that archive folder, I move that folder's contents down to my external hard drive on a regular basis. Like I think it's roughly every 3 months. That way, if I need it, I have to go back to something old. I still have the digital copies of it, but there's no reason for it to be chewing up space in the cloud. I mean, it's just sitting there. So why should I be paying for it to sit there? Because most cloud storage has a cost attached to it. And I'm not talking small quantities of cloud storage either. It's not like I'm hard pressed for storage. I've got multiple terabytes of
Right,
storage
right.
available in the cloud. But if I need it, I need it. Now, there are certain things, however, that I never put into the cloud. For example, video files. If I'm working on video editing or something like that, anything of a substantial size. When I mean substantial, I mean more than like 500 meg. I won't put that in the cloud. There's no reason to burn bandwidth uploading it and downloading it, moving it around. That'll be stored offline. I'll work with it that way, and that's just kind of what I need to do to make that stuff manageable. So when somebody talks to you about they're trying to get themselves organized, they're trying to be more productive when it comes to their file management, what's normally the first piece of advice you give them as they start to go down that path?
Patience. It takes time. My system is pretty robust, but it took time to get there. My system didn't get to where it is. When I remember, again, when I read the Getting Things Done and it says take the labeler. If you're watching the video, the labeler is behind me. It's still there. Okay. But I remember laughing. What difference it makes? Oh no, it make a difference. It make a difference. Grab that versus something else. So you need to be patient as you build this. It takes time.
Does it Do you recommend that somebody choose a system and stick with it? So, for example, if they work with Google Drive, just stick with Google Drive and put everything in there. If they work with OneDrive, pick it and stick it with it there. Or is there other advice you give them?
I think you should stick with one system. Yes, my case was Dropbox, and is Dropbox perfect? No. Is Google Drive perfect? No. But don't try to find what is better. Remember, you need to move. Um, you need to, if you decide to move, the worst thing you can do is to have what you were describing, a set of files here and a set of files
Mm-hmm.
here and a set of files here, because then you are never going to be able to find anything.
Yeah, there is one area that we haven't talked about yet that I use a fair amount, and I will admit I use both Google Drive and OneDrive. My professional system, my business runs through OneDrive. Uh, but amazingly, most of the work that I had to do is done through Google Drive because that's what everybody else is using. So, what I work with though a lot is I use the background synchronization capabilities of both platforms. They have plugins into the desktop level where they will actually sync off of folders that you designate on your machine up to the cloud and from the cloud back down. So if you're working on your local hard drive, which honestly it is much faster if you're doing, say, editing or something like that to work off of your local machine,
Right.
you know when you save it, it's automatically synced to the cloud. You can then get to it should you need to in some other location. I've found that I use that quite a bit because I don't have to think about it. It's a fire and forget type of thing.
Right.
It is important, though it will not replace good organizational methodologies attached to it. And the mindset of, well, I can just search for anything, I don't think works.
No.
I think it's too difficult to try and structure. You can't search effectively for something that isn't organized in the first place.
And that is the key. The search has improved. Wow. But in order to search effectively, you need to have a structure how those files are. Other than that, it's like putting all your file cabinet in a bag.
Yeah.
Okay, well, all my files are here. Well, yeah, can you find them? Of course, you can go through the bag. Okay, but can you go right now and say, hey, I need the W-9 of your company? And I know for the people who is not watching us on video, okay, they did not see it, but I just needed to turn around, pull the folder, okay, and this folder just contained that. This is my company. It has a W-9, it has the AIM, it has that. So I don't need to look into 20 things. I just, I know exactly what it is and how it's labeled. And that, can I search W-9 and find it? Maybe.
Yeah, but you're going to find everything else that has mentioned.
But everything else that has W-9 too.
Correct. Yeah, and that's where, I mean, search can be useful if it's targeted. Like if we use my analogy of the file cabinet, if you go to the right file cabinet and you you open the right drawer, then search is much more effective. Correct. Because now I know within that drawer I'm within a topic category, which is, it's kind of like applying metadata to it. Because I know, for example, this drawer in this file cabinet is everything about automotive. Great. Could be anything in there. Could be car insurance, could be
but everything is automobile.
Everything's automotive. So if I do a search on something in there, I know
at automotive. Least everything will be related to the automobile. Right. Yes.
And that's where I think structurally we have to give ourselves time to map that through and not be afraid to move things around.
And not be afraid to move things around and to rename them and to move them. Hey, you know what? Tax, you said financials. What's the word you use? Okay. I remember I had some time in the finance, and finances doesn't mean anything to me. So now there are tax and banks, okay? Because those are the two different things that I want to see before I have them all together. So remember, it's okay to make it work for you. That file cabinet is not for anybody else than you. And I even will tell this. If you have more than one person filing, get two. Okay. If these file cabinets in my office are mine. It has our family stuff. Yes. If my wife will tell me right now I'm going to start filing, I will buy for the other wall and
Yes.
duplicate every piece of paper. Why? I always tell the story. My grandmother tell me one day, can you find the phone number for aunt so and so?
Hmm.
Okay. I went to her phone thing and looked back and forward. Couldn't find it. So I went back to her and said, I cannot find it. Sorry. And she's like, what do you mean? Oh, it's on the E. Okay, E, but I understand Susan because it's S, but
Hmm.
E. Well, yes, because it's on Edward's wife. Okay, that's how she filed. Okay, God bless her, but that's what she used to
Yeah.
file. Okay, nobody else could find, she could find everything in 3 seconds, but
Sure.
nobody else could. So you need to remember that. What is tax for me, maybe financials for my wife. What is car insurance, maybe Jeep for my wife. So that
And
it's important.
that's the two pieces of advice I give anybody. One, do not stick with automatically generated names. So
Mhm.
many of the editing tools now will generate the name of your file based on like the first line in it or something like that. It will
Right.
generate a file name for you. There is no necessary relevance of that file name to your file system.
No.
The second thing, and the most important thing that you can do, is come up with a naming convention. So you mentioned earlier about naming a folder Art Augusto. That's a naming convention. My convention might be any time that I have a receipt, it's who got paid, when it got paid, and what it is. And
Mhm.
that may be the file name. Putting that list together does two things.
Create a
One,
checklist.
it forces me to be consistent. But second, and we've talked about this in the past, if at some point someone should have to go into that system and I'm not there to help them, they have a much better chance of finding what they're actually looking for. And that,
And actually, now that you mentioned that, I have never thought about this, but I'm going to print at least of those naming conventions, even maybe an index.
yeah,
Now that I'm
that
thinking
type of
about it.
thing, if you look at your file structure itself, you should have an index that you can always refer back to, because the other challenge, especially if you're in the process of cleaning up your file system, is, and even worse, if it spans multiple systems like mine does, having a consistent naming convention that you can apply across multiple systems. So
Mhm.
the file naming looks the same in OneDrive that it is in Google Drive, that it does in Box, that it does in Dropbox. Now it doesn't matter what system I'm using. Now, when
Right.
I pull it down to my local external hard drive, it still has that same structure. So you are truly planning for this cross-platform file support
Mhm.
in putting this together. But we've talked about this immeasurable times. It takes planning, it takes effort, it
Planning
takes
and time,
dedicated.
be patient.
And this is not the kind of thing that you should feel like it's busy work. This is probably the most important work that you can do, because every minute you spend doing this, you're going to save yourself an hour later on. I
Mhm.
can't quantify that, but based on history and experience, I'm pretty sure
But
that's
you will save
pretty
maybe
darn
even more than
close.
an hour.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that conversion table's pretty close on that.
Yeah. Well,
So yeah, file cleanup. I mean, we're getting into springtime now, so
it's a good
spring
time.
cleaning is a good time to tackle this stuff, especially as we get towards tax season and things like that. So
So follow us where you like to listen podcast, like us or subscribe to us and leave us a review. You can interact more with us on personalproductivity.club. Hey, let's come and talk about files and
yeah.
how to organize it and share your tips. We are Augusto Pinaud and Art Gelwicks. See you next time from your favorite device.